The soft notes of a Chopin nocturne still hung in the air of the Whittaker Club's grand atrium when Emeric Vane set his champagne flute down on the white linen tablecloth. The sound it made was barely a sound at all. Just the quietest, most deliberate clink against bone china, and yet every conversation within 20 feet dissolved into silence. The string quartet in the corner played on for exactly 3 seconds before the first violinist noticed the shift in the room and let her bow drift still against the strings. Delaney Shaw felt it before she saw it. That particular drop in atmospheric pressure, the way a summer afternoon goes airless before a storm arrives. She had been reaching for her water glass when the warmth drained from the room, and she instinctively looked up. Not at Emeric, but at the entrance across the atrium. At the man walking toward their table with the confident, loose-limbed swagger of someone who had never once been told no in his life. Reed Carver. 3 hours earlier, Delaney had stood at the mirror in the master suite of Emeric's midtown penthouse and told herself she was ready for tonight. The Whittaker Club hosted its annual fundraiser for pediatric surgical research every October, drawing the wealthiest surgeons, hospital executives, and philanthropists in New York into its marble-columned halls. Emeric had been a major donor for 11 years. He had a table by the east windows, overlooking the illuminated skyline of Fifth Avenue, and his presence at this particular event was never questioned. Neither was his companion. Delaney had worn the sapphire gown he'd chosen without argument. Not because she always deferred to him, but because the moment she'd seen it laid across the bed, she had understood exactly what he meant by it. She was not decoration. She was a statement. "You look nervous," Emeric had said from the doorway of the dressing room. He was already in his black dinner jacket, a bespoke huntsman cut that made him look exactly like what he was, a man to whom the world had learned to extend certain silent courtesies. "I'm not nervous," Delaney had said, and she wasn't. Not exactly. "I'm just aware that Reed Carver's hospital is one of the event sponsors this year." Emeric had been still for a long moment. "I know," he said. She had looked at him in the mirror. Of course he knew. Emeric Vane knew everything that intersected with her life with an exhaustive thoroughness that she had initially found alarming, then reassuring, and now accepted with the simple certainty of gravity. "If he's there." "He will not approach you," Emeric had said quietly. He'd been wrong about that, but he had not been wrong about anything else. Delaney had met Emeric 14 months ago in the emergency department of St. Clement's Medical Center, where she worked the night rotation as a senior ER nurse. He had come in at 2 in the morning, not as a patient, but accompanying one of his associates who had taken a blade across the forearm in circumstances that Emeric described as a kitchen accident and that Delaney had not believed for a single second. She had stitched the wound herself. Emeric had sat in the chair beside the bay and watched her hands move with the focused attention of a man accustomed to assessing skill under pressure. "You're very calm," he'd said. "Nurses are supposed to be calm," she'd answered without looking up. "Not all of them are." A pause. "You're also very good." She had tied off the last knot and looked at him then, for the first time directly. Dark eyes that registered everything, an angular face that gave nothing away. The jacket he wore probably cost more than her monthly student loan payment. "Thank you," she said. "Your friend will need to rest that arm." Emeric Vane had smiled, a rare thing she would later learn. "I'll be sure he does." He had left his card at the nurse's station before he walked out. She had not called him. He had arranged to be introduced to her through the hospital's charity board 3 weeks later, and she had allowed herself to be amused by the effort. She knew who he was by then, of course. Emeric Vane, CEO of Vane Meridian Group, a private equity conglomerate whose portfolio spanned infrastructure, maritime logistics, and pharmaceutical distribution across 12 countries. What the business pages did not print. What existed only in careful whispers and the deliberate silences of federal agencies who had tried and failed to build a case was that Emeric was something considerably more than a financier. He was the operating mind behind the Vane network, a structure of power that moved across the eastern seaboard with the quiet inevitability of tides. Delaney had known this before their second dinner. She had chosen to stay anyway. Because before Emeric, there had been Reed Carver, and after Reed, she had needed to understand the difference between a man who smiled while he harmed you and a man who showed you exactly who he was from the beginning. Reed had been a resident when she was a nursing student. Older by 11 years, brilliant, charismatic, the kind of doctor who moved through hospital corridors like he owned the air in them. He had singled her out at a department mixer, and she had been flattered in the way that 23-year-olds are flattered when powerful people choose them. For 2 years, he had chipped away at her with the patient, methodical precision of someone dismantling a wall brick by brick, critiquing her judgment, isolating her from her colleagues, making her doubt diagnoses she had been right about, until she no longer trusted her own instincts and had come to rely on his approval the way a plant relies on water. When she finally left him, Reed had not been angry. He had smiled. He told her she was making a mistake. He told her she would regret it, and then he had said, with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences, "Just remember, Delaney, I know exactly where your career ends and mine begins." She had not understood what he meant until 6 weeks later, when the nursing board had contacted her regarding a formal complaint filed by a physician at her former hospital. A complaint alleging that Nurse Shaw had administered an incorrect dosage during a critical care event, in which the patient had subsequently deteriorated. The physician who had filed the complaint was Dr. Reed Carver. She had lost her position at St. Clement's West. She had spent 9 months in licensing review. She had rebuilt from nothing at St. Clement's main campus, clawing back her confidence with the stubbornness of someone who refused to disappear simply because someone wanted her to. She had never been able to prove Reed had fabricated the complaint. Until Emeric. The atrium of the Whittaker Club was the kind of space that had been designed to make every person inside it feel important. Coffered ceilings 30 feet overhead. Murals depicting the great American patrons of the arts, candlelight pooled on linen and silver, and the understated jewelry of people who did not need to broadcast their wealth because the wealth broadcast itself. Delaney had been at ease, genuinely, for the first time at one of these events. Emeric had his hand rested loosely at the back of her chair. They had been talking about nothing important. Whether she preferred the roasted squab or the halibut, whether his company's recent acquisition in Rotterdam would extend into the port of Antwerp. Small talk, the way people who are genuinely comfortable with each other make small talk, leaving the significant things unspoken because they don't need to be said aloud. Then the champagne flute had gone down, and Delaney had looked up. Reed Carver was moving across the atrium with the ease of a man who had attended 1,000 events exactly like this one. He was in a well-fitted tuxedo, his silver-streaked hair freshly cut, a woman in green silk on his arm who looked as though she had not yet noticed the quality of the man she was attached to. His eyes swept the room with the reflexive territorial scan she recognized from years of watching him enter spaces. They found her table. He stopped scanning. For a moment, Reed simply stared. Delaney watched the calculation move across his face. The reassessment of her appearance, her company, the address of the table, the visible deference of the waitstaff around them. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not shame. Men like Reed Carver did not feel shame. Something more dangerous. The wounded entitlement of a person who believed that someone they had diminished had no right to look as though the diminishment had not worked. He said something to the woman beside him, handed her his drink, and began to walk toward the east windows. Delaney's fingers stilled around the stem of her champagne flute. She did not reach for Emeric's arm. She did not look away. She had promised herself years ago that she would never again make herself small in a room that Reed Carver had entered. But her heart was hammering in a way that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with memory. Reed! she said when he reached the table, because acknowledging him was better than pretending he wasn't there. Delaney, he said her name like a period at the end of a sentence. His gaze moved briefly and dismissively to Emeric. I didn't realize you were here tonight. I'm allowed to be here, she said. Something unpleasant crossed his face. Of course you are, I just meant. He stopped, recalibrated. The smile came back, the one she used to think was warmth. You look good. The sapphire works for you. Thank you. Are you still at St. Clement's main campus? There it was, the casual precision of the wound. Are you still at the lesser position? The question that said, I know exactly what I cost you. I am, Delaney said steadily. Reed smiled wider. That's great. That's really great. He finally turned to Emeric as though noticing him for the first time. I don't think we've met. Reed Carver, Department Chief of Neurosurgery at Carver Galt Medical Center. He extended his hand. And you are? Emeric did not take the offered hand. He regarded Reed with the particular blankness that his associates would have recognized immediately, and that Reed, who had no frame of reference for it, interpreted as rudeness. Reed's smile thinned. Old friend of Delaney's, he said. We go back a long way. I taught her a lot of what she knows, actually. He paused, letting that land the way he intended it to. Then, I've been meaning to reach out, Delaney. I heard your licensing review finally closed. That whole situation was unfortunate. I hope you don't hold any hard feelings. The room continued around them, conversations flowing, glasses lifting. No one in the general atrium was watching, but two men in dark dinner jackets who had been stationed near the catering entrance had gone very still. Delaney opened her mouth. She didn't get the chance. Reed reached forward and closed his hand around her wrist, firmly, the way he used to when he wanted to end a conversation before she'd finished having it. Come say hello to some people with me. There are folks here from the board who remember you from before. She felt the grip, the old pressure of it. Her chair scraped back a half-inch as Reed pulled upward. Reed, don't. Let her go. 2 words, said at normal volume. Not a command delivered to a room, but a sentence spoken to one specific person, and yet the conversation at the adjacent table ceased. A woman 2 seats over looked up from her dessert. The man across from her touched his companion's arm without meaning to. Emeric had not yet stood. He had not raised his voice. He had simply looked at Reed Carver, and the quality of that look was the kind of thing that people who lived safe, ordinary lives did not have reference for. Because they had never sat across a table from someone who made decisions about human consequences the way other men decided what to order for lunch. Reed released Delaney's wrist. He laughed, a short, defensive sound. Relax, pal, I'm a family friend. You are not her family, Emeric said pleasantly. I'm just. Emeric stood up. He was not the tallest man in the room. But there was something about the way he occupied space, the particular economy of motion, the complete absence of posturing that made him seem larger than the geometry of his body should allow. He adjusted the single button of his dinner jacket with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had nowhere more important to be, and stepped around the table. He positioned himself between Delaney and Reed with the same natural ease with which a wall positions itself between a room and the weather outside. Dr. Carver, Emeric said, his voice dropping to a register that required Reed to lean slightly forward to hear it clearly. Reed Ashton Carver, Chief of Neurosurgery at Carver Galt Medical Center, appointed 18 months ago through a board vote, in which 2 of the 5 voting members were beneficiaries of endowments you personally managed through a Delaware entity called Meridian Health Advisors, LLC. Reed blinked. What? Your department received a pharmaceutical supply contract last year from Halcyon Medpath worth approximately $4.2 million. Emeric's voice did not waver. Halcyon Medpath is a subsidiary of a company whose silent majority shareholder is yourself. You are billing the hospital for drug trials you are running through a vendor you own. That is self-dealing. It is also, depending on how the billing was classified to Medicare, federal healthcare fraud. The color left Reed's face with a completeness that Delaney had never seen before. Not in trauma bays, not in code situations, not in any of the high-stakes moments that defined her professional life. She had seen people frightened. She had never seen a man's certainty leave his body all at once. "I don't know where you're getting your information," Reed said. His voice had changed. The performance quality was gone from it. "The internal audit records of Carver, reviewed last week by a consulting firm I retain," Emeric said quietly. "And the nursing board complaint you filed against Delaney Shaw 4 years ago." A silence, the kind that felt pressurized. That was a legitimate clinical concern. "You dictated the incident report to your medical assistant at 9:14 p.m. on a Thursday," Emeric said. Delaney's shift had ended at 7. The patient you cited had already been discharged and documented as clinically stable by the attending on duty before she left. The medication administration log you attached was altered, not the original. A copy, generated from a template in your office system, with a timestamp that precedes the original by 40 minutes. He paused. "You filed a fabricated complaint to silence a witness who had access to your patient billing records." Delaney felt the words land in her sternum like something structural giving way. She had known Reed had lied. She had known it in the way that you know something when there is no evidence for it, when the lie is too clean, too conveniently timed, too perfectly designed to destroy exactly what it destroyed. But knowing and hearing the specific mechanism of it, the timestamp, the template, the 40 minutes, was something entirely different. It was the difference between suspecting a wound and someone finally turning on the light to show you the scar. The room around them had contracted. The Gala continued at its proper distance. But in this immediate radius, the air had changed into something that the people nearby could feel without understanding, the way animals feel weather before instruments can measure it. Reed's hand went to his collar. "I want to talk to my attorney." "Your attorney is currently in a meeting with investigators from the HHS Office of Inspector General," Emeric said. His tone was still perfectly conversational, the kind a man uses to describe flight delays. "She has been there since this afternoon. I imagine she is occupied." "You set me up," Reed said. The outrage in it was the last reflex of a man whose armor has been stripped. The instinct to perform offense because there is nothing left to perform. "I set nothing up," Emeric replied. "I documented what you did. The distinction matters." Reed looked at Delaney then. Something moved across his face, not remorse precisely, but the awareness that she was witnessing the specific collapse of the specific architecture he had built against her. It was the closest he was capable of coming to accountability, and it was not enough, but she looked at it anyway, and she did not flinch. "Delaney," he started. "Mr. Forsyth," Emeric said without turning. The club's event director materialized at Emeric's shoulder with the practiced immediacy of a man who understood the difference between managing an event and managing a situation. He was 50-ish, silver-haired, immaculate, and he had clearly been waiting at a precise distance for precisely this moment. "Sir," Forsyth said, "Dr. Carver will be leaving the event." Emeric's voice remained quiet. It did not rise, it did not harden. "Please have someone assist him to the private exit on 46th Street. Thank you." Forsyth nodded once. "Of course, Mr. Vane." 2 staff members appeared, not security in the aggressive sense, but large, deliberate men who materialized at Reed's flanks with the professional efficiency of people who had moved difficult situations before. The kind of men who had seen worse than this and handled it without breaking stride. Reed looked at them. He looked at Emeric. He looked at Delaney one final time, and what she saw in his face in that last second before he turned away was the thing she had waited 4 years to see, the recognition that he had not, in fact, gotten away with it. He walked toward the 46th Street exit without another word. The string quartet, which had resumed at some point Delaney hadn't noticed, continued in the background. The conversations around them picked back up. Someone laughed at a table near the bar, a bright, unconcerned sound that belonged to a room where nothing had happened. Emeric turned back to their table. He sat down beside her instead of across from her, the way he sometimes did when he sensed she needed the specific comfort of proximity rather than the formality of distance. He did not immediately speak. He picked up his champagne glass, took a small sip, and set it back down. After a moment, Delaney said, "A 40-minute timestamp." "Yes. You found that." "My people found it 2 months ago, when I was reviewing the circumstances of how you came to be working at the main campus instead of the West facility." He paused. "You never told me the full sequence of events. I found it on my own because I wanted to understand what had happened to you before me." Delaney looked at her hands. The skin on her wrist was unmarked. Reed's grip had been firm but not bruising, but she was aware of it the way the body keeps its own accounting, noting every instance of being handled without permission. "What happens now?" she asked, "with the OIG investigation?" "He will cooperate, or he will not, and either way the outcome for him is the same," Emeric said. "The billing records are sufficient without the nursing complaint documentation, but I have submitted the nursing complaint evidence to the board as well. Your record will be corrected." She let that settle in her chest. The nursing board complaint had followed her for 4 years, not loudly, but persistently, like a shadow on a bright day that you could only see if you looked at the right angle. The idea that it would simply be corrected, officially, permanently, made to reflect the truth, was an idea so large she had to sit with it quietly before she could look at it directly. "You've been sitting on this for 2 months, she said. "I was waiting for the federal timeline to align," he said. "I needed it to move simultaneously so he couldn't compartmentalize the exposures. If the nursing board heard first, he would have had time to retain counsel who could have delayed the OIG process. The sequence mattered." Delaney looked at him. The candlelight did something warm to the angles of his face that the rest of the world rarely saw. And she thought, not for the first time, about the particular strangeness of loving a dangerous man who was never dangerous to you, who treated you, in the specific texture of daily life, with a gentleness that was not softness but something more deliberate. A choice, made every day, with full awareness of what the alternatives looked like. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "I should have." It was not an apology exactly. It was something more precise. An acknowledgement without excuse that he had withheld information she had the right to have. She understood why he'd done it. The same control instinct that made him effective also made him slow to share uncertainty. He had wanted to bring her a solved problem, not an ongoing one. She understood it and she did not entirely forgive it, and both of those things were true at the same time, and that was fine. "I want you to tell me next time," she said. "I know," Emeric said, and then quietly, "I will." She believed him. She reached across the linen and laced her fingers through his. His hand closed around hers with the unhurried certainty of something that had decided on this a long time ago and saw no reason to revisit the decision. "The halibut is probably cold," she said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "I'll have them bring new plates." He signaled the waiter without releasing her hand. They left the Whittaker Club at 10:30, walking through the private entrance on 46th Street, because Emeric preferred exits that were not theatrical. The October air was sharp and clean off the Hudson, carrying the particular New York smell of autumn in the city. Exhaust and cold stone, and the distant sweetness of a roasted nuts cart on the corner of 6th. His car was waiting, a blacked-out Escalade idling silently at the curb. His driver, a man named Sal who had worked for him for 9 years and said very little, had the rear door open before they reached the sidewalk. Delaney stopped for a moment before getting in. She tilted her head back and looked at the slice of dark sky visible between the buildings, stars absent the way Manhattan's sky was always absent of stars, the city too bright for them. She thought about the woman she had been 4 years ago. Sitting in a licensing board office, with her hands pressed flat on her knees, trying to explain herself to people who had received a piece of paper saying she had failed. She thought about that woman carefully. The way you think about someone you once knew very well." And then she let the thought go. Sal held the door. Delaney got in. Emeric settled beside her. The door closed. The car eased forward into the stream of midtown traffic, headlights sliding across the tinted glass. "Are you afraid of me?" Emeric asked. He asked it the same way he asked most things that mattered to him, without preamble, looking at her directly. Delaney considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She thought about the moment he had said, "Let her go," in a voice that contained no drama and moved an entire room. She thought about Reed's face when the architecture came down. "No," she said, "I'm not afraid of you." He was quiet for a moment. "And tonight, what happened?" "Tonight," Delaney said, "was the first time in 4 years that something true was said out loud in a room where he was standing." Emeric looked at her with the specific quality of attention that she had first noticed in an emergency bay 14 months ago, the kind that did not skim the surface, but read what was underneath. Then he reached out and took her hand again, the same way he had at the table, without announcement, without making it more significant than it was, which somehow made it more significant. "Your world," she said. "I know what it is. I've known for a long time." "I know you do," he said. "I'm staying in it with my eyes open. I've never wanted it any other way." Outside, the city moved past the windows in its permanent, indifferent motion. The cabs and the delivery trucks and the late-night pedestrians, who would none of them know that a woman in a sapphire gown was watching the skyline and feeling for the first time in a very long time like she was exactly as large as she actually was, not the version of herself that Reed had spent 2 years constructing. Small, uncertain, dependent, correctable. But the real one, the one who sutured wounds in the dark at 2 in the morning without flinching, the one who had come back from losing everything and built something better with her own hands. The Escalade crossed 57th Street and turned north. Delaney leaned her head back against the leather seat and watched the city roll past, bright and enormous, and thought that the world outside could keep its tidy categories: the lawful and the unlawful, the safe and the dangerous, the respectable and the ruthless. In the back of this car, she had found the only version of safety that had ever felt real to her. The kind that didn't ask her to shrink. The kind that understood, without her needing to explain it, that she was not something to be sheltered from the world. She was someone to stand beside in it. And if anyone ever forgot that distinction again, well, they would only forget it once.